I want to mention that our speaker today is Chris Sheasley. He is an expert in interpersonal conflict management, conflict solutions. I asked him earlier today, how do you get into conflict management as a specialty? And he goes, well, that's kind of what I trained for. His degree is in conflict management, oddly enough. So that's what he does. He specializes in doing this kind of training for individuals and groups. He's worked with OHSU and Providence Health Systems in the Portland area, and he's been doing this for over 26 years, so hopefully he can bring us some pearls. So, Chris Sheasley.
Thank you for the introduction, Susie. Just to illustrate this for you, I actually brought a photograph from one of my recent cases here. Just a regular day on the job for me. And as Susie mentioned, I actually do a fair amount in healthcare. I mean, I know this will be a shock to you all that healthcare produces interpersonal conflict, but about a quarter of my work involves healthcare settings, and so as she mentioned, I do a lot of work up at OHSU, Providence, and basically all the healthcare facilities around the metropolitan area there up in Portland. So, I feel your pain, and I have some experience and some anecdotes today that I can share in that context. My wallet's in the other pocket. Oh, you're reading ahead. All right. So I want to start with a little story for you here. I'll get you in the mood here for conflict, this cheerful subject of conflict resolution in the workplace. So I had a fellow that was that one day they were out in the parking lot, she on her way in with a couple of colleagues and me on his way out, and he was going to his car. She looks at him and says, "Oh, I see you're clocking out for the day, Justin." And that was a huge insult for him. That was like the final straw that the senior manager would say to another, you know, looking at her watch, raising her eyebrows, the snarky voice and all of that. "See, you're clocking out for the day." And for him, that was like the culmination of multiple occasions where she felt, or he felt that she had attacked him. And for her part, she was totally kind of flabbergasted. Why was he going to such an extreme? What was this all about? And really confused on her part. She actually saw herself as a people person, a kidder, somebody who people like and gets along with, thought she had a good rapport with Justin. But of course, she comes to find out that he felt that she had kept insulting him, and this was it. So by the time the CEO called me in about 2 years later, these two had taken their teams off the edge into the abyss of conflict. So they had gone down in the inferno of conflict. Their relationship was asunder. Their teams were all aligned and on both sides of either you were pro her or pro him, and there was no middle ground. So this conflict had really gotten to that point where basically somebody was about to get fired in this situation. So does that sound familiar at all? Do you all have conflicts that kind of tend to grow and get worse, or the technical term worserer over time? All right. So it's those kinds of situations that we're going to be looking at today. And I'm going to use that case as one anecdote of several to kind of walk you through some of the key concepts of conflict. So that's the journey we're on, is how to deal with conflict. And that's an example for you of conflict in the workplace. All right. So to begin, I want to just highlight that we're going to do 4 things. The first is we're going to look a little bit at the consequences of conflict in organizational life. So what are some of the ramifications of mismanaged or poorly managed conflict in organizations? We're going to take a look at the 4 barriers that get in the way. What are the things that keep coming up in every conflict situation? And by the way, you can take this stuff home too and use it in other parts of your life. But there's 4 barriers that always seem to get in the way. And we're going to look at those and examine each one. Then we're going to talk a little bit about, as managers, a special skill and insight that would be useful for you all, and it's how to be impartial when dealing with employee conflict. So we'll take a slight detour, but that's kind of foundational for when we go back then and look at those 4 barriers. And I'm going to give you the solution to all of the barriers for conflict. So after this training, we're going to hop on a charter jet and fly over to the Middle East and solve all the problems of the world, because you all will have insights on how to solve human conflict by the time we're done. So does that sound all right? Why you came? Thumb ratings? All right, good deal. So let's begin our journey and take a look at the conflict. So the first thing to consider here is that
it's kind of a difficult concept to quantify. Like you can't really say, you know, conflict costs the organization X amount of dollars or X amount of time. But I suspect that you all, as advanced professionals, have done some thinking about the impact of conflict on your organization and in your teams. So how do we measure the cost of conflict in our organizations? What are some examples of the impact of conflict in organizations? Wasted time. All right, so that one invariably comes up. People are focused on the conflict, so they're not focused on what? Their job, right. And this is always incredible to me when I come into a conflict that's well matured and just seeing how much churn happens in terms of people's energy aimed at that, because you know, sometimes it's more interesting than their job, the conflict that they're generating. How else do we measure the cost of conflict? Turnover, right. So time wasted, turnover, people leaving, presumably people that you'd prefer to have stay that end up leaving the organization, so loss of good people. Any other ways that you measure the cost of conflict? Health, right? Yes. So actual effect on people's physical health and comfort. So that's a big one too. Well, I said it's hard to quantify, but I do have a couple of statistics here for you. So I want to give you a sense of some of the ways that this has been done in the research. So the first one I want to share with you is that poor relationships account for about 65% of performance problems. Now, if you think about that for a moment, how much time do we spend focused on the interpersonal relations versus people's skills and abilities as well as their motivation? On those latter two, that's what we tend to spend a lot of time on, is trying to get people motivated to do the job, trying to make sure they have all the skills to do the job. And yet, according to this research, people don't get their jobs done and aren't performing because they just can't get along with each other. So that is one way to measure it, with results such as this airplane that didn't quite land appropriately. You mentioned departure. So again, according to the same research, about 50% of people leave because they can't get along with each other. So losing good people, and this of course sets aside layoffs, but this highlights this issue of how many people you actually end up losing just because they can't work together. And then this one will hit particularly close to home for you all in terms of how much time you spend as a manager dealing with people stuff and having to deal with the problems in your workplace. Of course, this is going to be different for everybody in every different setting, but I'm seeing a number of heads nod out there. If you translate it into days of the week, you spend about a day a week dealing with conflict. So this is the challenge that we face, some of the problems that you encounter with conflict. I want to get you thinking a little bit about your own relationship with conflict, and so I'm going to give you a chance to get some exercise here. So I'm going to ask you a question, and you get 5-finger votes, all right? So 5 is an emphatic yes, absolutely yes, high, etc. The 1 finger, and be careful which finger you use, will be the very low end of the spectrum, not applicable, doesn't apply to me, etc. So the first question is, how impacted is your hospital by conflict? So 5 is, it's like a raging Armageddon. You're lucky to leave, you know, every day in one piece. 1 is, this is like constant Woodstock. Everybody gets along with each other. You know, you can't walk down the halls without getting hugged. So 1 to 5, how impacted is the organization by conflict? What do you say? I'm seeing lots of 3s. Okay, interesting, yeah. The average is actually 3.62 based on that finger survey, yes. Just a little quick math in my head. Now, I say a lot of 3s and a couple of 4s that kind of bump this up. So clearly then there's some conflict here, and I'd be shocked to see this organization not have some conflict because, again, it seems like that's endemic to healthcare in some ways. So how comfortable are you personally with conflict? This question is same scale. How comfortable do you feel like you can go into your next conflict and be successful? 5, you know, bring it on. I love conflict. I can't wait to have another conflict so I can, you know, get all the resolution stuff because that's so fun. 1, you know, I'd rather have my teeth pulled out with no Novocaine. So 1 to 5, your comfort with conflict? Okay. All right. Interesting. Good. Average there, 2.37. So I was seeing a number that is really down on this end of the scale. My goal is at the end of this that if I ask you this question again, we can bump you up 1 point on the scale so that you'll all add 1 point in terms of your comfort with conflict by the time we're done talking about this topic. All right, folks, so in my experience then, this cost of conflict and the fact that you all acknowledge this conflict in your organizations and that you all have your own struggles and comfort with it, it leads us to some questions then. Are you all overstaffed? That was a laugh line in. Do you have a lot of spare time, to spend a day a week dealing with it? Right. So in the context of organizational life and this fact that conflict is such a struggle for us, I want to give you some tools and tips and insights so that you can help people that are working with you and for you to be more successful with their conflicts, so that frees you up to be able to focus on the work, get things done, retain good people, and focus on what you all are here to do. All right? So to do that, we're going to talk about 4 barriers that get in the way, and then I'm going to give you some easy to remember and easy to apply tools to help you navigate through those conflicts and get towards resolution. All right, so let's go for it. First thing is that I'd like to give you a particular case study here that will help us focus on this and give you a kind of a way of operationalizing some of these concepts. I had an employee named, a manager actually named Shelley, and then her employee Ted. All right, so let me tell you a little tale of woe about these two. Shelley was the boss, thought she was doing great, felt pretty good in her role, until one day there's a knock on her door. And she turns around, and the CEO is standing there in her doorway. And she was rather startled by this. He had never done that before. And it only got worse from there. So he says, "Can I speak with you?" Comes in, sits down, and says, Shelley, I got to tell you, I just had an employee spend the last hour talking with me about you. And you are being accused of being guilty of violence in the workplace. She was rather shocked to hear this. Senior level manager, violence in the workplace, tell me more. So she hears this story from the CEO, and it turns out that one of her employees, Ted, her administrative assistant, felt that she was guilty of violence in the workplace. And the way that came about was Ted was her administrative assistant. She was hired in as the manager and inherited him as her administrative assistant and started working with him and changed his job and did some things. Well, all the while he's thinking that she doesn't like him, doesn't want him, trying to get rid of him, trying to change his job so it becomes meaningless and is no longer something he wants to do. So this is the process that they're going through, deteriorating, and then the match on this pool of gasoline. It's a small staff meeting. They're trying to figure out who can do this one little task. And she says, along with the hand gesture, "Oh, Ted can take care of that." So for him, he translated this as violence in the workplace. Like he'd been demeaned, demoralized, called out in front of his coworkers, really upset, goes to talk to the CEO, and violating like 10 levels of chain of command. He's one of those guys that takes like the open door policy seriously, where he goes upstairs and talks to the boss's boss's boss. So anyway, he does that, and it leads to this whole investigation and people coming in and HR and formal investigations, etc. So by the time I got there, this one had really deteriorated to the point one of these two folks is going to be fired. So I give you this tale of woe and sadness because it's going to be a foundation that we're going to use as an example as we examine the different barriers in conflict situations. So we are now about to enter into your materials here, and I'll give you some fill-in-the-blank opportunities. So those of you that like to leave with complete materials, this is your chance to take a look at that. All right, so the first stop in our 4 points for the barriers to conflict is violated expectations. So at the root of all conflict is an expectation that one and both sides have where they want to have something happen. They want people to treat them in a certain way. You want people to talk to you in a certain way, to communicate with you in a certain way, to do things or not do things. And these are all our kind of unwritten guidelines, our expectations about how people are going to treat us, and when you're a manager, how they're going to treat each other is the question that comes to bear on this. So are these things points that we advertise? Do we have these up on our cubicle walls or wear them on our shirts? No, of course we don't. How do we know when we violated somebody's expectation?
It's usually too late.
Yeah, right. After, bam, after we stepped on it and it goes off. That's when we know that the expectation was important to the other person, but we didn't know it until we violated it. So this creates obviously quite a dilemma for us conflict resolvers, is how can you resolve something you don't even know that it's there in the first place? So this is the first apparent barrier to conflict situations. I'd like to ask, when you think about Shelley and Ted, what were some of Ted's expectations as I described that little scenario to you? What did he expect?
Probably no change.
Yeah, he didn't want change. He liked the status quo. He was happy with his previous boss and the job description he had. Absolutely. Anything else?
He probably would have liked to have been asked before she volunteered.
Nice, right. That's good too. So wants to feel included, involved, that he has a say, a voice, some power, and a little bit of control. Good. All right, so that kind of gives you a flavor for that. How about for her? She's a little more opaque, but how would you identify her expectation here? He did one big thing that obviously was upsetting to her.
She didn't go to her.
Say again?
He didn't come to her.
Right, indirect, and not only that, but went over her head about 5 levels. So that was a huge violation of her expectation, right? So this is the first barrier, and this triggers several things then that are almost like dominoes in the conflict cycle. And I want to make sure that you have some clarity about this one, so I'm going to turn you loose for a moment, ask you to chat with each other at your tables, and I'd like you to describe a situation in your work world where this might be at play. So if I'm a member of this group, we might all kind of look at each other and figure out who has a good juicy conflict, a current one that happened recently or something, and you can just volunteer that and then describe it, Reader's Digest, kind of like I just did on a couple of cases. So just describe it, and then I'd like you all to work together to identify what the probable, hypothetical, violated expectations were for each side in the conflict. So that's what I'm going to invite you all to do. You can refrain from using proper nouns probably since it's a small group. So any questions about what I'm asking you to do? All right, have fun. All right. I'm sorry to interrupt those. All right, cut. Sorry to cut off your good conversation. You'll get a chance to continue the conversation on the next levels as we go through this. So were you able roughly to kind of think about this filter and this idea of expectations and identify some of those in the work that you all are describing? Make sense? Any questions on this first concept? Okay, so this is foundational because everything that we're going to do from this point forward flows from this point. And what I'm suggesting to you all is that in all the work I've done, 26 years, 2,000 cases or so, I've always seen this phenomenon at play, that there's this expectation, somebody violates it, and then everything else starts falling down. It's kind of like defensiveness. Like, how quickly does it take for you to become defensive? How quickly? Fractions of seconds, right? Nanoseconds. It's almost instantaneous. So when that happens, when you have that feeling, when your employees have that feeling, it's usually because there's some expectation that they have that's not being met and in fact is being violated by the other person. All right, so what happens as a result of this is we start to feel like victims. All right? So the person violates some rule we have about how people are supposed to behave, and this leads us then to feel like we are victims, that it's intentional, that they're trying to do us harm. Woe is me, the poor me, because the other person is doing something mean, and therefore I'm a victim of their negativity, their bad behavior, just they're a mean and nasty person, and so I feel like a victim. All right? And I'm suggesting that this is true for you when you're embedded in the conflict. It's true when you're dealing with employees who are kind of doing things to each other. Now here's an important point about this though, folks, is that we're not talking about victimhood in the sense that, oh yeah, everybody's a victim and let's play the violins and feel sorry for people. And you know, we start to get that mindset that maybe they're just playing it up a little bit here so they look good, so that we'll feel sorry for them and we'll blame the other person. And they're coming to you as the manager and you think, oh boy, that's really terrible. They must have done terrible things to you. And then you go to the other person that is involved in this, and how do you think that person feels? Person B. The same, exactly. So that's the crazy thing about this. And again, I found that true in all my work. I go to one side, I hear this tale of woe, and then I go and I'm sure I'm going to meet the devil incarnate. You know, based on the description from the other side, you know, I'm going in hoping I'm not going to be fried, and then it turns out that the other person is a victim too. They have their same concerns and issues that they are upset about. And so they end up feeling like a victim too. It's not wordsmithing. They're not just playing a game. It's genuine victimhood. That's how they feel about it. And there are consequences in terms of resolving conflict that we're going to come back to that are critical, but you first have to accept this reality that people are not just playing games. They're not just trying to play it up. They really feel that way. So, victimhood. How was Shelley a victim in the Ted Shelley scenario? She what?
He never gave her a chance.
Right, never even came to her. I'm going to add another layer just to make this one more real and even sadder. She actually liked him, and they had kind of a carpooling kind of rapport because whenever the weather got really inclement, she would go get him and drive him to work. So they had kind of that carpool, chit-chatty relationship. Of course, where she thought, we're cool, and if there's a problem, he'll come to me. Well, 6 years he never really came to her until the boss is standing at her door. So she certainly felt like a victim, but you can also see how he felt like a victim, right? He felt whittled down, diminished, demeaned in his work till he didn't have any value to contribute, is how he was feeling. All right, so I'm sorry for I'll turn that slide off. I know that's a little hard to look at for very long. So I'd like to invite you all to go back into your conversation there and identify how did each side feel like victims in the cases that you all were describing. So just kind of play with this concept of victimhood a little bit and make it real. All right. All right, so were you able to identify ways in which your participants felt like victims? All right, so let's review. What happens first? Leads to? That's the spirit. All right, this table is really, you know, and I appreciate you. I'm going to give you all a special reward here. You all get the Tiger of Honor here for your participation, and the rest of you can...
Oh, wait. It's a rattle.
Yeah. Yeah, you can use it, you know, for stress reduction and conflict. That's it, yeah. All right, so excellence is rewarded in this training afternoon, all right? All right, so we violate the expectation,
Pick it up over there.
feel like a victim. There's a lot at stake here. And this leads to our next problem, which is vilification. Yes. So how do you feel about a person who violates your expectations and makes you feel like a victim? You think they're horrible. You think they're a bad person. It's almost like you end up putting on a special pair of goggles just to look at this person. And when you see them and they say good morning, you know, do you trust it? Think about your nemesis. Don't make any eye contact with anybody right now. Okay. Okay. But think about your nemesis at work. You know, if they say, "Hi, how you doing today?" Do you trust them? You know, do you think that they're intentions are honorable. Let me ask you, when Shelley is walking past Ted on her way out, and Ted looks up and says, "Oh, Shelley, where are you heading? And when are you going to be back?" I'm going to give you two options, all right? Two options. Option A, Shelley hears this question and thinks, "Oh, excellent. What a on top of it admin assistant I have here. He's trying to figure out where I am, where I'm going, when I'll be back, so he can direct people to me, and he's really on the ball here. He's trying to do his job." That's option A. Option B is she thinks, "That meddling so-and-so, he is just by asking the question, implying that I shouldn't leave, that I'm gone from the office too often. He's basically spying on me." You know, so I'm asking, when the conflict starts to evolve and we get to this stage, what do you think, which option was it, A or B? B, right. So we start to believe that the other person is a bad person and out to do us harm. That's where conflict ends up taking us. All right, so in your situation, I'm going to make this super quick. You got 28 seconds in your small group to just identify how each side, in your case, sees the other as a villain. All right, and action. Do I have to take that tiger away? I may have to strip you of your tiger. All right. So in our journey here, we lead to another place. Another thing that starts to happen is that the conflict, as you can see, starts getting layers to it. Things tend to grow, and the spiral of conflict implies that one person does one thing, another does something in response, so the other does something else in response to that, and the conflict grows. And as it grows, we run into the fourth barrier for conflict resolution, is that we can't even tell what this thing's about anymore. Like, what started it? Why in the heck are we fighting anymore? So there's something at the middle of that bonfire pile that was actually important at the beginning, but it gets lost in the conflict growth. So, well, let's see here. I'm going to pile, you mentioned that, and that made me mad, so I'm going to mention the thing you said 3 years ago, and I'm going to put that on the bonfire. Oh yeah, well, you gave me a dirty look yesterday. I'm putting that on the bonfire. And we just start piling things on the bonfire, and it's so big and raging and hot, we can't even tell what it's about anymore. So this is the fourth and final roadblock to conflict, is that we don't know why we're fighting, don't know what it's about, and the cause, the source of the conflict has now been lost in the messiness of the conflict. All right, so this becomes actually a real linchpin that we can use to unlock conflict and actually resolve the situation. So I'm going to leave you hanging on that for a little bit, but I just want to embed this idea that there's a reason that people are fighting. It's deeper often than we think, and it's somewhere back at the beginning. And our job as good conflict resolvers is to try to identify what that root is, why it's important to each side, and then craft a solution that will meet that basic need that's been long ago forgotten in the raging inferno of the conflict. So that's the concept. Let's think about Shelley and Ted for a moment. So what's Ted's, one of his basic needs? Like, what started this whole mess for poor old Ted?
Validation.
It's what?
He needs validation.
Validation. All right, perfect, right. So you can see in the dynamic there that He's not being validated. He's not being appreciated. He's not feels like he's not contributing anymore. So all that stuff. See, there's a reason I gave you all the tiger. This table is just top notch. All right. So that's one thing. What else? But here's another chance. I have plenty of stuffed animals. So any other group think of another thing that is at stake here for either Ted or Shelley. I'll open it up to Shelley too. What does she want?
Direct communication. I'd do anything for an animal.
Yes. All right. Well, you're in luck then, because you get the pig of happiness. Yes. Yes.
I think Shelley wanted him to talk to her about his concerns.
Aha. Voila. So exactly so. So she wanted direct communication. She wanted to validate the relationship. She wanted to be trusted. She wanted, all those things, right, that a manager would legitimately want in a situation like that.
One time in the carpool?
You would think so, right? Just somehow they never quite got there. All right. So this is our kind of our grand finale problem here. But folks, I'm about to give you the solutions here. I'm not going to lead you down this path. It's not a dead end. I've given you all the solutions to conflict. I've just kind of cleverly disguised them. In fact, as Secretary of Health John Gardner once said, and don't worry, I never heard of him either, but he had a good quote here. We are continually faced with a series of great opportunities brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems. And so it is with these barriers to conflict. They look pretty nasty and insurmountable up front, but there's actually the seed of resolution built into each of those. And I'm going to walk you back through those in a little bit and help you get some insight into that. Before we go there, though, I want to give you a chance to kind of reflect a little bit more on the case that you've been kind of thinking about as your group tables and examine it a little bit through that idea of what started it. What's the core underlying concern? And remember, it's usually a big concept. It's something kind of fundamental that somebody really wants at kind of a deep gut level. So think about that at your tables and try to unearth what that might be for the situation that you're thinking about.
Grass and straws. That's like a good idea.
All right. So you're able to identify some root causes? Yeah? All right. So this is a pause point. We're going to check in, make sure that you all are retaining all this information. So this is a competition. Each table has to, without looking at your materials, which you're going to close up right now, so cover up, close, don't look at it. All right, first table to reconstruct the 4 barriers and raise your hand will get one of these animals taken away from the other group. And if, yes.
But we don't get to do it?
So, no, you get to do it. You'll get an extra bonus. So reconstruct the 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I saw that hand first. Okay, go ahead. Oh, no, they have to prove themselves. You have to prove we don't give the pig to just anybody. So,
Violated expectation,
yeah.
victimization, vilification, and losing the root cause.
All right, nicely done. They earned it fair and square.
You didn't see me, dude. I was up all day long.
I'm sure. So, so this is how it looks here, folks. He violated my expectation, so I'm a victim. He did it because he's a bad, terrible person, and as this thing has grown, I don't even know what it's about anymore. Or as us West Virginians say, what in tarnation's going on here? I don't even know anymore. All right, so that's how we got here. Let's start to navigate our way out of this. All right, we're going to come back to those, but as I mentioned a little bit ago, I want to give you a little foundational concept here that'll help you be effective in dealing with employee conflict. All right, and when we're done, I'm going to hope that you have a slightly different mindset about this than you might currently. So the first question for us to consider is, as employees bring conflicts to you, how many of you all are neutral in terms of what they're fighting about and the personalities? Do you feel like you're an objective and neutral entity that can, you know, like Solomon, you know, split the baby or do whatever it's going to take? Do you have that kind of wisdom, neutrality when you're dealing with the conflict among your staff? And raise your elbow if you feel like you're neutral. Neutral, we've got a couple of claims here of neutrality. All right, all right. You were just kind of, I like the dance you were doing, you know. Okay. So I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you here a little bit on this, all right? Because I did not raise my elbow, other than to demonstrate it for you. I didn't raise my elbow, and I'm an outside third-party neutral. That's part of my job description in some settings. But I don't actually feel like I'm neutral because I have opinions. I have opinions about people, about situations, about personalities, biases, whatever. I have all that stuff going on in my head just like everybody else does. And so when I have people that I'm working with, even though I don't work with them all the time, and folks, it's a lot harder for you because you do, so it makes it doubly challenging for you to be neutral. And here's another tough question. Do you think they think you're neutral? Okay, and that counts for a lot right there. So A, I don't think you're actually neutral, and B, they don't think you're neutral either. So this is a real dilemma, isn't it? So the question here is, what can you do, and why is this even important? I would like to suggest to you all that impartiality is a different way of looking at this, and ultimately a more effective and achievable one. Impartiality is more of like a verb. It says that if Carl and, I need some names here, Carl and Brian come to me with a problem, I'm sure you guys get along famously back on the work site here, but you know, Carl comes and he tells me the situation and I'm hearing it, what's going on, and we're talking about it. And I start getting kind of this image about, oh, what Brian must have done, and you know, he's a bad guy and he did these terrible things to Carl. So I'm going to start kind of making up, and plus I've known Carl, I've worked with him, he's not the kind of guy that would do that, but you know, Brian, you know. So anyway, so yeah. All right, so you know, we have all this stuff going on in our head and we're dealing with the two different people. I'm not going to be neutral, and that's going to influence how this plays out then, isn't it? I'm going to start influencing kind of the outcome, and I'm going to lead them to solutions I think that are going to be more conducive and helpful to one side than the other, etc. So this is a slippery slope that I've seen many, many managers get into, HR people, all different professions where you're supposed to be helping people resolve their conflict, but we end up in putting our own bias into the mix and then framing it and having it go off in a direction that's different than what they would have come up with. So here's the point of all of this. The reason that impartiality is so important is it allows the people with the conflict to be the one to resolve their conflict. Okay, let me give it to you by this fella who figured it out 400 or 500 years ago. People are better persuaded by their own decisions than those that have come into the minds of others. So what I'm suggesting to you all, to managers, is kind of a radical idea. Is that you have to actually trust that your employees will come up with the best solution to their own conflict. That they don't need you to grab them by the nose ring and pull them towards a specific solution. That you have to instead entrust them with their own ability to resolve their own conflict. The way we do that is through impartiality. That we allow it to play out, we give them the benefit of the doubt, we stay neutral as long as we can, to ask them questions so that they can come up with their own solution to their own conflict. Here's another kind of visual way of looking at it. So there are advantages to that. So why else do we do this? Why allow this to happen? What do you think the advantages are?
Promotes engagement.
Say again?
Promotes engagement.
Yeah, in terms of engagement. So if they come in and in the first 30 seconds you hear their thing and you say, oh, I get it. So here's what you should do. Are they going to be engaged? Are they going to, right. So there's a challenge there. You shut them down. If you stay impartial, tell me more, what's going on, what's your thought about it. You're more in a coaching model, then that's going to be more effective. What else are the benefits of this? Ownership, right. Yeah, so in terms of their ability to follow through and to really own the solution, that's what impartiality helps infuse the conflict with as well. All right, let me give you an example from my work. Like I had a case a while ago where the employee left the organization, turned around and filed a lawsuit. I'm going to sue because I was mistreated, framed it as a employee equal employment opportunity situation. And we were mediating the heck out of this thing. It was a long case, 6-7 hour type day. And they weren't quite getting anywhere. And I was starting to close up my books and thinking, this isn't going to work out. And that's a dire moment for a mediator. I try to mediate people into submission. No, I'm kidding. I try to mediate and be a diehard and get it to work out, and don't give up until they give up, right? But this one, I was starting to lose some hope here, and I was starting to close up my notebook. And the management folks said, actually, Chris, we have one last offer. We don't know if she's going to like it or not, but we have one last offer. All right, well, go ahead. What is it? This is kind of last chance. And they said, all right, well, Sally, we would like to give you one of our old delivery vans. It was a delivery company. We'd like to give you one of our older delivery vans. We'd like to give you a year of coaching and help you set up a delivery company with your own van in your little town that you live in. You've said you wanted to do this. Well, here's an opportunity that we can help facilitate for you. She was overjoyed. She said, yes, that'd be great. She dropped the charges. No money was exchanged. It was just a very elegant solution. And I'm highlighting this for you to let you know that if I had sat at that table for 100 years straight, I probably never would have come up with that solution, right? It was so left field and out of the blue, but they came up with it. So it's more creative. It's more creative than the solution we might come up with. It's more meaningful to them, and they're going to follow through. All right? But that's not going to happen if we're putting our own spin on things, right? So I'm going to pause here and just let you digest this for a moment. I'd like you all to think about this concept and just see if you have any questions about it, what's challenging about it. So talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you about a minute to do that, and then we'll check in with you. All right. Sorry about that one. All right. Sorry, as a mediator, I'm always trying to get people to talk. As a trainer, speaker, I'm trying to get people to stop talking. So thank you. All right, so were you able to kind of think that through a little bit and make it real for yourselves? Any questions, concerns, objections, protests, insights, anything on impartiality? Do I have any converts here? Are you all going to try to be more impartial? All right, that's the spirit. So I saw heads nodding, yeah. All right, so impartiality, look, it's hard for me to do, and I'm trained in this stuff, and I do it for a living. It's going to be doubly hard for you all, and in particular because you know the people, and your job is often to try to work it out, to make a determination, to make a decision, which is why I'm harping on this so much, because I think you can gain a lot in conflict among your employees by just doing two things. One is allow some front-loaded kind of temporary impartiality. Okay, that's just one thing. Just as much as you can, hold back before you give your opinion, before you tell them what to do. That's kind of phase one of this. And the other is that if you just hold on to this fact that the conflict resolved by them is going to be more powerful than if you just impose a solution on them. And it's kind of like a go slow to go fast scenario. You go slow a little bit at the beginning, do the more listening and the hearing what they have to say and all that. Then down the line, you're basically teaching and training them how to be more effective resolvers of their own conflict. And I want to just close this section by saying I get the worst conflicts that organizations produce. Right? They don't call me in because people like each other. They call me in long after they've tried a lot of different things and the conflict is really going to take people off the edge, and good, important, high-level people are in danger by the time I get there. I'm saying that even in those cases, the success rate of my work is about 80%. Now, that's not about me, that's just about this process of conflict resolution and mediation. We still get an 80% success rate even in the worst cases, and that is to say that people with the conflict are working out their own solution to it 80% of the time. So folks, for most of the conflicts you're dealing with, you can have a pretty high success rate if you entrust that they can work it out and you give them the opportunity to do that. All right, can I hear a yeah? All right, good, that's good. All right, so let's continue then. We're going to go back to the 4 barriers, and as promised, I'm not going to leave you hanging here. I'm going to give you the solution to all of those barriers. All right. So to do that, let's give you another case scenario here. This one will kind of give us another way of looking at some of these concepts. So this was Hank sitting in his office, and this is actually a hospital setting, and he's reading an email, and up pops an email from Julie. And he reads it, and he's instantly furious. Can't believe that she'd send him an email like that. He gets up, goes down, and her door is closed, which is unusual. She's the CNO in this hospital. Anyway, he pounds on the door. He hears a muttering inside, thinks that's an invitation to come in. He opens the door. She's sitting there with 2 of her lead staff, and they're having a meeting. She looks up all startled. What, Hank, what, I'm in a meeting. What's going on? I need to talk to you right now. Well, Hank, I'm in a meeting. I can't. You're going to talk to me right now. I just got that email. I can't believe you sent that. This is outrageous. Well, okay, but against her better judgment, she gets up, goes out with him. They end up across the hall in a more private setting, and he just lets her have it. Can't believe you're pulling out of this project. We've been working on this for 6 months. You were integral to this. You brought some of the key people to the table. If you pull out, they're going to drop out. We're going to lose the whole thing. What are you thinking? Da-da-da-da. And then she fires back. The conflict goes out of control. All right, so this is the Hank-Julie dilemma. I'm just giving you that because I want to give you that case scenario to think about as we walk through the solutions to the conflict dilemmas that we've raised for you. All right, so the first one that we had was the violated expectation. Now the question for us is, let's play with this case for a little bit. What was Hank's expectation there?
She would continue the project.
Right, that she would stay, follow through with what she committed to, understand the importance of this thing, set them all up for success. What else was he mad about? Email, right. So how she notified him, so come to me directly, that was his expectation. You'll come to me directly, you'll stay in the project. And her expectations?
That he wasn't going to explode.
Yeah, right. That he would like calm it down a little bit and be reasonable, that he would not barge into a meeting and all that stuff, right? Okay, so with all those things in mind, let's go back and navigate back through these and figure out how we can solve them. So how do you solve the problem of the unknown expectations? I gave you the answer. Yes, you reveal and deal with them. Okay? So if we don't know what they are, and our job as good conflict resolvers is to reveal them, then we start asking questions that reveal what the underlying concerns are, what those expectations and rules are that people have, and then we just deal with them. And deal in this sense is kind of a shorthand for discussing, it's kind of dialogue and negotiation. So all the stuff I do, whatever I call it and dress it up in different ways, at the core it's just having people have conversations and negotiations. So that's what you can do on the expectations. What are your expectations? In fact, I have some questions for you you could ask. Things like, what do you want her to do differently? Specifically, what do you want her to do? How do you want her to, or how do you want him to get your attention when he needs to meet with you? Well, not knock on my door when I'm in a meeting and make me come out. Okay, so what do you want him to do? Well, I want him to send an email. He can put a red flag on it. He doesn't use them very often, so I'll know it's important. I'll deal with it then. We can set up a time to talk. That's, you know, whatever. So that's revealing the interest, the need, and the expectation, and then working through it. All right, another way to get there might be this. Why did you find it so frustrating? So what was it about this dynamic or what the other person did, and why did you find that so frustrating? Well, it was frustrating because, and then they start to answer it, and now you have another clue about what the expectation is. Why that person gets so elevated about it is a hint at what the expectation is. Make sense? All right, another one is she's asking you, what's she asking you to change about how you communicate with her? So just asking one person, you know, Janet, what Sam is asking of her. And this is kind of like those molasses moments when you're in a resolution third-party kind of role. Okay, Janet, what do you hear Sam asking you to do differently? Okay, and then she says it, and I'm like, is that what you're asking? No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking her for this instead. Okay, now what do you hear him asking? Okay, da-da-da. Is that what? Yes, okay, so now you understand what he's asking you. So can you do that? Would that work for you? It's okay to say no or yes or whatever, you know. So, okay, so it will work for you. So you can do that. Now what do you need from him to make it easier for you to do that? So see, I'm just walking them through it. It's kind of like molasses because we're slowing it way down, but making sure that they have clarity about what each side wants and what each side needs. Make sense? All right, so the next one is about, we're going to get to that in a moment. So this next one, what was the second stop on our barrier path? Yes, the victim. So what did I really emphasize about that quality of victimhood? What did I emphasize more than anything else? That it's both sides and it's
Their reality.
reality, right? It's true for them, right? So here's the challenge for you all folks, is you got these folks coming to you, you see Charlie, I hope there's not a Charlie in here, but you see Charlie coming down the hall at you, and you already know, what he's going to say, and it's going to be another tale of woe and all this, so you kind of have all these expectations about what he's going to be saying to you, and probably who he's even going to be talking about. So we have all that, and we are going to have a hard time thinking about him as a real victim in this situation, because it just doesn't seem like he is, based on what you know from your perch in the organization, and you know how he offends other people and how his part in it. But folks, he really genuinely believes that he's a victim, all right? He's not just making it up to make himself look good. He's doing it because he feels that way. So then, what's your job with both Charlie and the person he's in a dispute with? What's our task? If somebody comes to you and feels like a victim, what's our job there? What do we do or say? Over here?
Impartiality.
Okay, yeah, true. So how do we get there? What are we doing? Just in the moment, real time. Me and Sam here. He's a victim. He's telling me about his victimhood. So what do I do? How do I act with him? Listen. Listen, right. So I hope that's what you said. I heard what I wanted you to say. Okay. So right, I'm just going to listen to what he's saying. I'm going to hear his story, and I'm going to be there with him and let him just vent, right? So that's your task. Now, how do we do that? This is the active listening 101 part of the conflict resolution training, which will last just 8 seconds. What do we do to listen to him? Some skills? Huh? Validate, eye contact. You all know this stuff. Summarize, paraphrase, all that good stuff, right? But here's the uncommon knowledge. This is why I'm actually harping on this point in particular, is that we do all that stuff for a reason. So why do I do that with him? What's the advantage of showing the victim that I'm hearing what he's saying? Why bother?
Because he feels better about it, and then he's a little bit more amenable to a resolution.
Okay, so he's kind of becoming more amenable to a possibility of a resolution. I mean, what else? I'm just really asking, what are the advantages of listening to somebody? Trust gets built up. yeah, right, I'm getting more information. And this is an important point I want to highlight for a moment, is that in conflict resolution, information is power. When you have more information about the situation, you gain more power. It's just a kind of a fact of negotiations, a fact of conflict resolution. The more you know, the better position you'll be in to help people resolve it. And you're not going to get more information. I'm not going to get more from Sam if I just interrupt and say, okay, well, it sounds like, you know, she said something that offended you. Well, get over it, and you know, and here's what you can do. So I'm shutting them down, turning them off, and I'm not getting more information. Hence, I'm not getting more power. So all those things are good, but there's other part of this that we kind of miss, and it's not intuitively obvious, so I'm going to give it to you. And it is our issue about getting in a position where we can sow doubt. All right? This is a little esoteric at first, but because I'm going to walk you through this. So as Sam talks to me, and I talk with him, and I explore the situation, and he starts to trust, he starts to share more, all of that, then it gets to a point where if he feels like I really hear him, understand him, and I'm kind of there with him, then I get to a stage where I can start to ask him questions that dismantle this idea that he's purely the victim in the situation. I might ask him, in other words, questions like these. So Sam, if you could redo that conversation with the other person, what would you do differently this time? All right? So I'm fishing here for a little self-awareness. Can he imagine that he did anything that might have been perceived poorly by the other person? So that might be one question. You know, Sam, when I talk to Vicki later about this scenario and this incident you're describing, what do you think she's going to say about what you did? And now, if he's self-aware and he trusts me enough and we've developed some rapport through this incident here, then he might be able to say, well, she'll tell you that, you know, I was really stubborn in this situation and I wasn't listening to her perspective. Okay, so now he's opening up to me, and you can see what's happening to his sense of victimhood. Now he's starting to reconsider that a little bit. Maybe he's not a pure victim. Maybe he did some things that contributed to this dynamic. You see how that works? And then I love this other one, which is what parts of the critique have some merit? And that's an important question, too. I had a client recently, she said, well, in that staff meeting last week, my colleague called me. She said that I was rude, unprofessional, and disorganized. Now, I'd been with her and talking with her for 45 minutes or so, and so at that point I had permission, I had earned permission to sow some doubt, and I said, and which of those three characterizations rung most true for you? She said, well, I can be kind of disorganized. Okay, so it sounds like your lack of organization has an impact on your coworker enough that she would blurt that out in an all-staff meeting. So what can you do about that? Now we're talking about not whether or not her colleague is a jerk that always victimizes her and that she's always the victim, but that her behavior might impact the other person too. So that's the power of using this leverage to try to dismantle the conflict. All right, so let's think about Hank and Shelley for a moment. What were some of the ways that we could have sown doubt in that situation? So Hank and Julie. Oh, I better make this one an assignment for you. So I want you to go into your small groups. Just think about the Hank and you always use different names to protect the innocent parties here. So Hank and Julie. And what were some of the dynamics through this filter that we've covered so far? So again, how can we look at how can they reveal it and deal with the rules? And then secondly, what ways might we kind of ask questions that will sow doubt for those two in that situation? So you can do that case that I gave you, or if you all had another case you were already working with, you can use that case. So just use the two concepts, the two solutions that I've given you so far, and put those into practice in talking about your situation. All right, I'll turn you loose. You got 2 minutes. Charge! That's the spirit. All right. All right, everybody awake now. So, using those couple of concepts, I want to describe the case for you on how it worked out with the Shelley and Ted one, for example. So it turned out, what do you think the number one thing Ted regretted doing in that conflict with his boss? Going to the boss, exactly. So we got to a point where he was able to hear that for Shelley, that was a big linchpin moment in their relationship that totally just derailed everything from her perspective. She didn't want to have much to do with him after that, was afraid of him, didn't want to be alone with him in conversations, things like that, because of what the ramifications might be. So she was definitely feeling like the victim. But we got enough trust built up in this process where I was able to find out that he regretted it, that he in fact was just going to the CEO because he actually felt he had some rapport with that person and was able to reveal some things and talk things through. Never expected it to get to this point, and then it blew up way beyond the scope of what it should have been. In fact, it was kind of the CEO hearing a key word and going nuts with it and kind of overkill. So that whole thing took on a life of its own. But for their relationship, those two, when they were able to reveal those things, they dealt with it, and they each kind of recognized how they contributed to it. So that one had a happy ending, and I'll share some of the insights from the other ones as well. So that's kind of the first two layers here in terms of getting some steps towards resolution. Now let's talk about vilification. All right, so we said that we tend to vilify the other person. We know that when Shelley sees Ted or Ted sees Shelley, they're going to look at each other and assume the worst. Like I had a case not long ago where the parties, one of them was saying that she found out her colleague was in a band outside of work, and so she thought, I'll find out more about that. Maybe that's the way to connect with him. We're not doing very well on the job here. We're having all this tension. So she started asking about his band. When I met with him privately, he said, oh yeah, she's been snooping around, trying to find out about my band. It's something else she's going to use against me, And I know from talking to her, her motives were totally pure. She just wanted to, groping for some way to connect with him. And yet, he had the lens on, always looking at the negative, and that's an example. So I ask you to consider the people that are working with each other. They start to think of the other as the enemy, as a bad person. I had a client who said, when I asked her if she'd mediate with her supervisor, she said, well, Chris, would you negotiate with Hitler? Yeah. I mean, comparing her boss to Adolf Hitler, just the hyperbole is over the top, but it's a sample of how people get so worked up and so convinced that the other person's just a horrible person. But I invite you to consider this, that most people fall somewhere in between here. Most of the people we work with, even that person you're kind of frustrated with in your work world, the truth is that they're not probably a horrible person. They probably have friends and colleagues that do get along with them, and they probably do have family that appreciates and loves them and all that stuff. But in conflict, we don't treat each other well. And that's my takeaway point on this section right here, is conflict, and the dynamic of conflict leads people not to treat each other well. And then we end up thinking that the other person's a bad person, when actually it's just the life cycle of conflict and that growth of the conflict getting worse that makes us not treat each other well. So how do you deal with this one? How do you deal with this thought that we're thinking that they're that, and they're certainly not that? Somewhere in between, some questions might help you are, so what other reasons might there be for the person to do that? It's kind of like the Dr. Phil type question, why would a reasonable, rational person do that? Ask that question and then pause and wait for an actual answer. Why would somebody who's reasonable and rational actually do that? Somebody who has a job and a family and all that stuff. Another one is, so what did you want to convey? What were you trying to convey when you did that? And this implies that I'm asking you what your intent was, because he certainly interpreted it way differently than you're saying it. And invariably, I'll ask that question, Judy, what was your intent? Well, I just wanted to find out what was, what he was thinking about the project. Oh, well, then he says, I thought you were challenging me and telling me that I was off base and that my ideas were all bunk and horrible. No, I really wanted to know, Judy said. So getting people back to their intent can be quite powerful. And then this one, last one, again, I use it even in these hideous cases that I end up with, that people still appreciate things about each other. The Hank Julie situation in the hospital, turned out that he hired her when about 10 years prior, and he actually recruited her, wanted her to come into the organization, and she kind of saw him as a mentor at the time. Now clearly over 10 years their relationships changed, she got more power in the organization and tensions arose and things, but at the core they actually had a high regard, a good history with each other. So it's that kind of stuff we're looking for to help de-vilify and debunk this myth that the other person is just a bad, horrible person. All right, so the last one is about what's it all about. So the conflict has grown and we don't know what the source is anymore. So the question we need to start asking ourselves is, what's really important? Okay? So I'm going to illustrate this for you with a little act of vandalism here. So I'd like you to verify for me that that's an actual dollar bill.
Looks like a dollar bill.
I think you're supposed to hold it up to the light.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
Not counted.
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, good. It's been a while since retail, huh? All right. So here we go. The room drops silent. Okay. So from the absolute silence in the room.
Do we have any tape?
All right. So I can tell that from the moment, that pregnant moment there, that we didn't necessarily like that, me ripping up a dollar bill. I'd like to ask you all a question, though. Why do you care? Like, why did you have an emotional, gut-level reaction to seeing me rip up a dollar bill? What was it about that dollar that triggered that kind of feeling?
I was wrong in my assessment.
No, it's a real dollar. I'm 100 pennies poorer now, yeah. But I have trust that it was worth it. It was worth $1 to teach you all this, yes? Okay, value. But we're going to do kind of like the 5 whys thing. So why does it have value? What does it represent to us? Why do we care about dollars? Why do you want to have some of those in your pocket and in the bank? Which one? Okay, there we go. So that's kind of a core value that we attach to money. If I have enough of those, I'm not going to starve to death tonight. I'm going to have a roof over my head. Okay, so I get basic security. What else does money represent? What else does it give us? Hard work. And so what do we get from our hard work? We get a sense of reward, accomplishment, affirmation. Okay, so affirmation. Society values what I do enough to give me some of these so that I can, take care of myself and my family. So affirmation. So money represents security, affirmation. What else? Sure, patriotism and all the things that wrap up in that for us as well. Power, how about? Some control over your life. Folks, the point I'm making here ultimately is that we end up fighting about the piece of paper, but when I ripped it up, I didn't rip up a piece of paper. There's all kinds of paper here I could have ripped up and you wouldn't have cared. But I ripped up a dollar bill and you cared a lot. And what I'm suggesting to you all is that all conflict is like this. It looks like it's about one thing. It looks like it's about job duties, shift assignments. It looks like it's about how we communicate and the use of email and direct conversation and all that stuff, the messages and projects. But what it's really about are the kinds of words that you all just alluded to. Power, control, understanding. And our job as good conflict resolvers, and the superpower that you all have now, is to go back out and when you see the conflicts and they look kind of petty to you, or they look like they're not, how could people be fighting over this? You felt that way, right? At times. Think about the dollar bill. The conflict that they're describing to you is just a dollar bill. The reason they give a darn is because it's attached to some underlying need, something that's deep down, that's being impacted in a negative way, and that's what they're really asking for. So, to tie all this up with a bow, your job is, when people come to you with conflict, hear what they're fighting about, and then ask them questions that get down to what it's really about. And some questions that might help you are the obvious one, what are your core concerns here? What do you really want to see happen? Why are you so concerned about this? You keep proposing this idea that the other person, you want them to do X and Y. So why do you want them to do that? What will that give you? Well, to help me feel like they, that they respect my contribution. So it's respecting your contribution that's important. So now you can build some solutions around demonstrating respect. Or even just go back to the beginning. What do you want what was going on here at the beginning that's a concern for you now? All right. So that's your goal in conflict resolution, is to help people kind of take all the burning embers and burning logs and file cases and everything off of it and figure out what's at the root of it, what's at the source of it. And the power of this is that you can fundamentally change the conversation. So Shelley and Ted might talk and argue in my effort to resolve their conflict. They're going to say things like, Shelley's going to say, Ted, you need to come to me directly if there's a problem. You can't circumvent me. And he's going to say, well, you need to give me back some of those job duties that you stripped away and gave to Carla. And you need to be more, you need to, in staff meetings, not single me out. Okay, so they're going to argue back and forth like that. And you can imagine them saying things like, he says, well, there's an open door policy. I can go upstairs if I want to or need to. That's why we have that kind of chain of command. And I'm supposed to do that if I need to. So they can argue about that all day. But when he translates his needs, or you as the resolver, translate it into their underlying needs and say something like, so Shelley, one of the things I'm hearing Ted say here is that he wants to be valued in the work that he's doing. Is that right, Ted? And he says, yes. Now, do you think she's going to look at him and say, Ted, I don't care about your need for being valued? No. And again, even in these mean and nasty cases I get, people don't go that low because they don't actually feel that way. They actually can see the value of that. So my point to you all is if you transmorgify, to use the technical term, you transmorgify the conflict from the apparent surface level stuff and start bringing up the underlying needs, then you fundamentally change the conversation. It's much more powerful. So now we can talk about how Ted can feel valued and how Shelley can feel like she has legitimate managerial control and respect from her employee and is getting a job done for their organization. So that's the great translation that can happen. All right, so that's where we are. I'm going to ask you all to contemplate this stuff at your tables. This is an opportunity to come up with the best question at your table that you could possibly think of that you want to ask me. So talk to each other, recite, contemplate, think about what we talked about, and then one of you at your table will be assigned by the others as the question asker, because that person will have a question so awesome that you want to pitch it up, and you all at your table agree that that's the best question. That's your assignment. Talk a little bit, come up with a question, single that question out and ask it of me in just a moment. Any questions? Action. All right. So let's see if there's any questions that you all would like to ask in our last couple of minutes together. Yes, sir.
When do you know you're in the 20% that can't be resolved?
All right. Fair enough. First of all, there's kind of a baby with the bathwater potential here, which is that, yes, we can all think of those cases that are just seemingly impossible, right? But I'd like to encourage you to try anyway. So the things that we've been talking about, and the skills and the mindsets and the things that we've been exploring can work in even some of the most intractable appearing cases that you get. All right? but I'm also realistic about this and know that some of the cases aren't going to be resolved. And so in my experience, the way that I usually give up when there's just no self-awareness in one of the parties. So it's really that no matter how we've tried to do this, they can't see their own part in it. And it's all blame all the time. Now, I know a lot of the people you might be thinking of in the conflicts you've had to manage might present that way initially, because we all do. Because why? Because we're all victims. And so we always think that the other person. But if you can't get past that at all, and there's all kinds of questions I ask to kind of get to that point where they say, yeah, I might have had a little bit to do with this. Or yes, there's something I did do. But if I never get that, there's never that breakthrough, then that's usually my sign, either not to take the case in the first place or to give up once I've tried. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So along those lines, and how do you, if you have just significant cultural barriers that are just well entrenched with individuals, to really break through those, what's a good mechanism or tool to use them to go against?
Yeah.
Go after that?
Sure. I tend to think of the work I'm describing and this, the work to go deep and to try to figure this out and give people a chance to talk and all that. I find that inherently humanizing, that it just helps people to share their perspective and their expectations and what they want and need and all that. That's in effect kind of a cross-cultural communication ultimately. So if there's two different cultures, then it's an opportunity for them to explain their expectations. What do they want in their culture? What are their expectations, and what's yours? And how can you two then negotiate some way of working together that addresses both of your needs? So it's a negotiation, but they have to say it out loud first, and you can create the environment where that becomes possible. So I know that's kind of a short answer to a very dense question. So come back tomorrow and we'll do the 5-hour cross-cultural conflict resolution training. All right. Any other last-minute questions? You're going to wake up at 2 a.m. and hate me if you don't get to ask it? Yes?
Are the children in the pictures related to you?
No. But the kid flagged out on the bed at the very beginning, that's my son, yeah. You got to sneak in a picture of your son, you know. All right, team, that's it. Everybody feel like you got a little bit of insight? Did you move up like a half a finger on the scale of confidence? All right, good. I'm glad to see you. Nice to work with you all. All right, thank you. Anything else?
I don't have any closing words of wisdom, so have a great afternoon, and see you tomorrow.
All right, Sam.